Picture a kitchen the size of a small church. Now fill it with fire so hot it blisters the skin on your forearms from 6 feet away. Add the smell of 300 pounds of raw meat, the scream of a pig being prepared on the block to your left, and a head cook who hasn't slept in 36 hours and is holding a ladle the size of a small oar. That's a medieval castle kitchen on feast day. Magnificent on one end, nightmare on the other. A place where you could watch a subtlety being carved from pure white sugar into the shape of an angel in the morning and fish a rat out of the soup stock by evening. We're going back there tonight. Not to the great hall with its painted walls and candles and lords in velvet. We're going to the place that made all of that possible. The kitchen, the spit room, the larder, the scullery, the back stairs and the dark corridors, and the place nobody talks about. When they're talking about the glory of the medieval feast, we're living it. One day, one person. Everything they would have seen, smelled, heard, and survived. So, I make these history stories, and honestly, I have no clue if anyone actually sleeps to them, or if you're all just people with a strange fondness for hearing about what it was like to catch a goose with your bare hands at 4 a.m, and then stuff it with its own innards while a man twice your size yells at you in medieval French. Either way, subscribe if you want. Get comfortable. Pull the blanket up. Here we go. The first thing you need to understand about the medieval feast is that almost nothing you've seen in a film about it is accurate. Not the food, not the people eating it, not the way they're eating it, and absolutely not what's happening 3 rooms away from the gorgeous candlelit hall while all of that is going on. The Great Hall looks magnificent. There are tapestries on the walls showing hunting scenes and biblical stories and the genealogy of the Lord who lives here, going back 7 generations to a Norman grandfather who came over with the Conqueror and was rewarded with this stretch of English countryside for his trouble. The rushes on the floor have been changed this morning for the first time in 3 weeks, and the new ones are scattered with lavender and sweet herbs, so the hall smells almost pleasant, which is a miracle because last night it smelled like what it actually was. A room where dogs sleep and men eat, and the hearth fire occasionally blows smoke back into the room depending on the wind. The trestle tables are set. White linen cloths, pewter plates for the more important guests, bread trenchers for everyone else. The great salt cellar is positioned at the precise centre of the high table like a throne, because in some ways it is a throne. Everything about this feast, everything about the social order of this world is organised in relation to that salt cellar. The people sitting above it are one kind of human being. The people sitting below it are another. You're not sitting anywhere near it. You are, in fact, currently on your knees on a stone floor in the kitchen yard, scrubbing the inside of a cauldron that is roughly as tall as you are, and so blackened on the outside that the soot comes off on your hands and won't come off your hands no matter how hard you scrub. Your knuckles are bleeding from where they caught the rough iron edge 3 passes ago. You haven't eaten since yesterday evening. The feast is in 6 hours. This is England. The year is 1387. You're 14 years old, and you've been a kitchen boy at Harwood Castle for 3 months, which means you're the lowest form of life in an establishment that has a very clear idea of exactly how low that is. Let me tell you about the kitchen. Not the hall, the kitchen. The kitchen at Harwood is actually 3 separate buildings connected by covered passages, because you never put the kitchen directly attached to the main hall if you can help it. Fire is the reason. Fire is always the reason. Kitchens burn. They burn regularly. They burn catastrophically. You put the kitchen 20 feet from the hall, connected by a passage, and when it burns, you lose the kitchen instead of everything. The main kitchen is perhaps 40 feet long and 30 feet wide, which sounds large until you understand that at peak operation it will contain 23 people, 4 open hearths, 2 bread ovens set into the wall, a spit rack holding 6 spits of varying sizes, 3 hanging chains for pots, a central wooden work table so scarred and stained it looks like a map of somewhere terrible, and the combined heat of everything burning at once. On a normal day, the kitchen temperature is uncomfortable. On feast day, with all 4 hearths running and the ovens packed, it is genuinely dangerous. People faint. People lose their eyebrows leaning too close. People get burned so routinely that the cook's hands look like old leather from a lifetime of small scaldings. You have been here 3 months and you already have 4 burn scars on your left forearm. Small ones. Splatter burns from hot fat and boiling water. They'll add up. By the time you're 30, if you're still in a kitchen, your arms will look like a map of a war. But that's 30. That's a lifetime away. Right now you're 14 and your knees are cold on the stone flags, and the cauldron won't come clean, and someone is calling your name from inside. Your name is Thomas Atwell. You came here from a village called Brickenden, which is about 12 miles northeast and contains, as far as you know, approximately nothing of interest. 40 families, a mill, a church with a roof that leaks in 3 places, and fields that mostly grow barley and debt. Your father is a freeholder, which means he's slightly better off than a serf, but not by much. And when the steward's man came through looking for boys to fill a kitchen position at the castle, your father said yes before you'd finished asking what the question was. Thomas? The voice is sharper now, coming from the kitchen door. You know who it is without looking. There is only one voice at Harwood Castle that sounds exactly like a man who has been awake since before dawn, and is going to be awake until well past midnight and is already furious about it. That is the voice of Gilbert, the head cook. And when Gilbert says your name in that particular register, you put down whatever you're doing and you move. You put down the cloth and you stand up and you go inside. The heat hits you at the door. It always does. You've been out in the November morning, which is cold enough that your breath came out in clouds when you were scrubbing, and then you step through the kitchen door and it's like stepping into summer. A very angry summer. The 4 hearths are going. The hanging chains have 3 large pots on them already, and whatever is in the leftmost pot is producing a smell that is half wonderful and half deeply unsettling. The way a lot of medieval cooking smells once you know what actually goes into it. Gilbert is standing at the central table. He's a large man, perhaps 40 years old, with arms that look like they belong to someone larger, and a face that is permanently red from the heat of working in rooms like this one his entire life. He has a cleaver in his right hand, not because he's using it, but because he was using it a moment ago and put it down and hasn't put it all the way down, which is a habit of his that keeps everyone in the kitchen in a state of mild alertness. You're done with the cauldron? Nearly, sir. He looks at you, not angry. Something worse than angry. Measuring. Bring it in. I need it by the fire in 20 minutes. And wash your hands. You look like you've been mining. This is the thing about Gilbert. He doesn't shout. Not usually. The cooks in the stories, the ones who throw things and rage and terrorize their underlings every waking moment, those exist, and you've heard stories about them from older boys who served at other houses. But Gilbert doesn't do that. What Gilbert does is look at you with that measuring look, and somehow that is worse, because it tells you he's already calculated exactly how much of a problem you are, and what it will cost him if you fail, and that cost is already making him tired. He turns back to the table. Today we are feeding 112 people, he says, not to you specifically, but to the room. Everyone in the kitchen adjusts slightly, straightens, focuses. We have 3 courses. First course, pottage, broth, roasted meats, a baked lamprey, a dish of herons, a roasted swan. Second course, venison in sauce, a roasted peacock, spiced pig, a subtlety. Third course, sweet dishes, wafers, hippocras, the gilded almond paste. The Lord has guests from London. One of them is a bishop. The bishop has a particular opinion about how lampreys should be prepared, which I was told about this morning, and which I will now tell you about. He pauses. The kitchen is very quiet except for the fire. He thinks they should be poached in wine. They will be poached in wine. Anyone who says anything else about this to anyone will explain themselves to me directly. Are we understood? It's not a question. Around you, the kitchen workers indicate that they are understood in various ways. A nod, a quiet yes, a subtle adjustment of posture that means yes without involving the mouth. You have no idea what a lamprey is. You're from Brickenden. In Brickenden, the most exotic thing anyone ever ate was an eel from the mill pond, and that was on someone's wedding day. But you will find out. That is the thing about this kitchen. You find out everything eventually, usually in the middle of doing it, with Gilbert watching and the clock on the wall saying there is no time to make mistakes. The door opens and Edmund comes in, carrying a basket that smells of herbs and river water. Edmund is 15, 1 year older than you, and he's been here 9 months, which makes him approximately 9 times more knowledgeable than you, and he knows it. He's a tall boy, narrow-shouldered, with a perpetually knowing expression, and ink stains on 3 of his fingers from the time he was briefly assigned to help the steward's secretary, and discovered that clerical work was warm and dry, and therefore vastly preferable to kitchen work, a discovery that lasted 2 weeks before the steward's secretary asked for someone else, and Edmund returned to the kitchen with the ink stains and a philosophical outlook. "Eels," he says to Gilbert, setting the basket down. Gilbert doesn't look up. "Wrong." "They said eels at the river, sir. They are lampreys." Gilbert finally looks up. "And if you tell me they're the same thing, I will make you peel every onion in that barrel personally." Edmund does not say they're the same thing. You make a note. Lampreys are not eels. This is your first piece of knowledge for the day. You learn your second piece of knowledge about 20 minutes later, when you are sent to the larder to fetch spices and discover that the spice chest is locked, and the key is worn on a cord around Gilbert's neck at all times even. You will later learn when he sleeps. This is because the spices are worth more than everything else in the kitchen combined. More than the silver-plated serving dishes. More than the largest of the copper pots, which are themselves worth more than a good horse. More than the tapestries in the lesser hall. The spices that sit in that locked chest in small linen pouches come from places so far away that most of the people in this castle couldn't find them on a map, and couldn't read a map anyway, and the distance is part of what makes the spices valuable, and the spices are what make the food at a feast like this one taste like something from another world, and that otherworldly taste is part of what makes a great lord into a great lord, at least in the eyes of everyone eating his food. Gilbert opens the chest himself, lets you look. You've never seen so many different colours of dust. Pepper, black and sharp, ginger, pale brown, cinnamon in long rolled sticks, saffron, that one in its own small sealed box, the colour of old gold, worth more per ounce than actual silver, cloves, mace, nutmeg, cardamom, cumin, galingale. "Don't touch," Gilbert says, though you haven't moved your hands. What does the saffron do? He looks at you. It makes things yellow, he says. A pause. And it makes the Lord's guests understand that he is the kind of man who can afford saffron. He closes the chest, locks it, tucks the key back under his collar. Everything in that box is a message. Every dish we send out of this kitchen tonight is a message. You understand? You think you do. You're not sure yet, but you'll understand it better by midnight. The kitchen fills up. By 7 in the morning, there are 12 people working in the main kitchen alone, plus 4 in the connected spit room, 3 in the scullery, 2 boys running between the kitchen and the larder, and a woman named Agnes who is responsible solely for the pastry and who works at a small separate table near the lesser oven with the focus of someone diffusing something. Agnes has been making pastry for this kitchen for 11 years. She is 32 years old and has arms that are somehow both strong and precise, built by years of kneading and rolling and crimping, and she talks to nobody and allows nobody near her table, and she has never once in 11 years, according to Edmund, produced anything that wasn't exactly right. She is the most reliable person in the kitchen, and possibly the most frightening, not because she is unkind, but because her standards are a physical force that you feel in the room when you stand near her. Your job for the first 4 hours of the day is largely transporting things. This is the fundamental role of the kitchen boy, to be a human relay between the places where food is stored and the places where food is prepared. You go to the larder and you carry back a haunch of venison that is roughly the size of your torso and smells of the salt it's been packed in for the past 2 weeks. You carry it to Gilbert's table and Gilbert unwraps it and examines it with the expression of a man who is expecting to be disappointed and occasionally is. This one is fine, he nods. You take the wrapping to the yard. You come back. You go to the spice store and carry a heavy mortar and pestle and a selection of things Gilbert has written on a small piece of wood in letters you can't read, but that Edmund translates for you. Pepper, ginger, dried galangal root. You bring them, you come back, you go to the well, you carry water. You do this 6 times. The bucket weighs about 12 pounds full, and the well is 60 feet from the kitchen door, which means by your 3rd trip your arms are burning in a different way from the fire. You carry wood. The kitchen hearths consume wood at a rate that seems impossible until you see it happening, and then it seems merely terrifying. The wood for the main kitchen lives in a covered shed attached to the west wall, and you and 2 other boys spend 40 minutes moving it into a pile inside the kitchen door, so it's accessible during the peak hours when nobody can leave the fire. Your hands are rough already. 3 months of this kind of work will do that. The skin on your palms has thickened and dried and cracked in the cold, and the cracks fill with ash and animal fat and don't come fully clean no matter how you wash them. You're used to this now. You were not used to it in August when you arrived, and your hands were still the soft hands of a boy who mostly worked in fields, and the first week you cried about it at night in the straw of the sleeping area, and then felt ashamed of crying, and then felt ashamed of feeling ashamed, and then went to sleep. But that was August. This is November. Your hands are different now. At about 9 in the morning, the first major crisis of the day occurs. The wood for the spit room is wet. This is because someone, and nobody will admit who, stacked the wrong pile of wood last night, and the covered shed's roof has a leak, and the wood on the east side of the shed gets wet when it rains from the northeast, and it rained from the northeast last night. And the spit room hearth is not currently producing enough heat to turn the largest spit at a sufficient rate, which means the pig that needs to be fully cooked by the 3rd hour of the afternoon will not be ready on time. The person in charge of the spit room is a man called John the Spit. That is actually his name, or at least the only name anyone uses for him. He is 48 years old, which is old for someone who works next to an open fire for 12 hours a day, and he has the reddest face you have ever seen on a living person. John the Spit is not panicking about the wet wood. John the Spit has seen everything and panics about nothing. What he does instead is send his youngest spit boy, a child of about 10 named Watt, to find Thomas, which is you, which is why you're now standing in the spit room being told to solve a problem you don't yet understand. Get the dry kindling from the middle rack, John says. He is turning a smaller spit by hand, a motion so automatic his hands do it without instruction from the rest of him. Stack it at the base of the main hearth, not the sides, the base, and then tell Edmund I need 3 more of those logs from inside the kitchen, the ones that have been sitting by the hearth overnight. You do this. You crouch at the base of the spit room hearth, and you can feel the heat even from the failing fire. Enough heat that your face goes red and your eyes dry out and you have to blink constantly. The kindling goes in. Edmund brings the logs, complaining about it under his breath in a way that's definitely not complaining out loud, because complaining out loud about anything is a very quick way to find yourself doing something worse than whatever you're currently doing. The fire catches. The heat builds. John the Spit examines the pig, which is a large one, pale and pink and eyeless on its spit, and calculates something in his head that has to do with heat and time and mass and experience, none of which you can do because you're 14 and from Brickendine and the largest thing you've ever cooked is a rabbit. "We're fine," he says, not to anyone in particular. "We're fine." He doesn't sound completely certain. Back in the main kitchen, things are accelerating. The word for what happens in a medieval kitchen on feast day is not really cooking. Cooking is what you do for 4 people around a single hearth. What happens here is more like orchestration, like a series of things happening at different speeds that must all arrive at the same moment without any of them ruining any of the others. Gilbert is conducting this, but conducting isn't quite right either, because he's also physically doing things at the same time, breaking down a heron with his hands, smelling the contents of a pot, cutting and tasting and adjusting, all while maintaining in his head some kind of map of where everything is and when it needs to be, where and what can go wrong, and what the consequences will be if it does. The pottage is already going. The pottage is the simplest thing and also the most essential. Every feast starts with pottage. Every feast at every level of English society starts with some version of pottage, which is essentially a thick soup stew made from whatever's available. But the pottage at a feast at Harwood Castle is not the pottage of a peasant's cottage. This one has leeks and onions and parsley and thyme and a quantity of pepper that would take your father's household 3 months to accumulate at current prices, and it has good stock in it made from bones that have been simmering since yesterday, and it has been adjusted 3 times this morning already, and it will be adjusted again before it goes to the hall. The colour of it is deep gold green. The smell is extraordinary, rich and savoury and warm, in a way that makes the back of your mouth water, even when you know you are not going to eat any of it. You're not going to eat any of it, or if you do, it will be what's left after the 112 people in the hall have eaten their fill, and there will be a version of what's left over, and it will have been sitting in the pot for 4 hours, and someone's ladle will have been in it 100 times, and the people eating it will be the kitchen workers crouched near the hearth with wooden bowls, not lords at trestle tables with white linen. This is the equation that runs underneath your entire day. The distance between making the food and eating the food. The distance is not physical. though you will walk miles today between kitchen and larder, and well and spit room, the distance is something else, something that lives in the way Gilbert never actually eats what he makes until it has gone through the hall first. The way Agnes finishes a pastry shell so perfect, it looks like something from a church, and then covers it with a cloth and turns back to the next one without pausing to admire it. The way the food is treated as a performance for other people, a display, a message, and the people making it are the backstage hands who don't appear in the show. At 10 in the morning, the peacock arrives. You're sent to the larder to help carry it, and when you get there, you stop in the doorway. You've been in the Harwood larder before. It's a cold stone room off the north side of the kitchen yard, cold enough that your breath comes out in small clouds, and it contains the organised provisions of a household preparing for winter. Barrels of salt fish, salt pork, smoked meat hanging from hooks in the ceiling, dried herbs in cloth bags, root vegetables piled in corners, a barrel of honey, a barrel of dried peas, a rack of hard cheeses, a shelf of vinegars and verjuice in sealed crocks. You fetch things from here a dozen times. The cold and the smell, that particular smell of salt and preservation and the cold breath of things stored in the dark is familiar. But you haven't seen the peacock before. It's been kept back here since yesterday, and now it's ready. And what ready means for a peacock served at a medieval feast is something you were not prepared for. The peacock has been skinned, the whole skin, feathers intact, peeled off carefully and set aside. The bird itself has been roasted, and now it's been dressed again, put back into its own skin, reassembled so it looks, from a distance of several feet, like a living peacock that someone has simply arranged in a resting position on a silver board. It is one of the most beautiful and most disturbing things you have ever seen. Edmund is behind you. He says, with the casual authority of someone who's seen this before, "They do it with swans too. Sometimes they put a bit of burning cotton in the mouth so it looks like it's breathing fire." You look at the peacock. The peacock looks back at you from its glass eyes, which are not its real eyes, which are somewhere else. Its real tail feathers spread behind it in that impossible fan. The purple-green iridescence catches the cold light from the small larder window. "Pick up the board," Edmund says. "Don't tip it." You pick up the board very carefully. The peacock is heavier than it looks, which is a sentence that applies to most of medieval cooking once you get close enough to it. You carry it back to the kitchen and set it on the high shelf where it will wait until the second course, and where every person who comes into the kitchen for the next 4 hours will stop for a moment and look at it, because it is looking at them, and something about that is both impressive and slightly wrong, and both of those qualities are probably intentional. By midday the kitchen is so hot that the air near the main hearth shimmers. You've stopped noticing the heat as a single thing. It's become the background condition of the world. When you step outside to the kitchen yard for a moment, it's like stepping into cold water, the shock of it, and you stand in the cold air and breathe, and your face stops burning, and then you go back in and it all comes back. The heat and the sound and the smell and the motion. The smell of the kitchen at full operation is something that you cannot fully describe and would not fully want to. There is good in it, the smell of roasting meat, the spiced broth, the bread from Agnes's oven that is not feast bread but plain bread for the kitchen workers, the herbs that get thrown on the fire occasionally by John the Spit for reasons that are partly practical and partly, you suspect, habit. And there is bad in it, or at least complicated, the smell of rendered fat, which is both savoury and something else. The smell of offal, because some of the dishes use offal and offal smells like what it is. The smell of the cauldron you cleaned this morning, which still carries a ghost of what was in it last time, whatever that was. Something with a lot of fish. And underneath all of it, the smell of the fire itself, wood smoke and char, which coats everything, and which you will carry on your skin and in your hair until you wash, which will not be today. At noon, Gilbert gives you 20 minutes. This is your meal break. You eat in the yard with Edmund sitting on a low stone wall with a piece of yesterday's bread and a cup of ale, and you eat quickly because 20 minutes is 20 minutes, and because the bread is good, even though it's a day old, and the ale is thin but wet and cold, and exactly what your body needs. What happens after the second course, you ask Edmund. He's eating with more patience than you, tearing the bread into pieces. What do you mean? The hall, after we've sent everything out. What do? He looks at you. They eat it. I mean the order of it. The thing with the subtlety, Edmund chews, considers whether explaining things to you is worth the effort. After the second course, he says, they bring the subtlety. The subtlety is a thing made of sugar. Sometimes it's a castle. Sometimes it's a religious scene. Sometimes it's some kind of symbol relating to whoever the feast is for. Agnes has been making this one for 2 days. It's a ship. He pauses. For the bishop. Ships. Because bishops. I don't know. Something about the church and ships. I don't know why. I wasn't there when they decided. Is it to eat? You could eat it. It's sugar and almond paste. But mostly you look at it. It comes in on its own dish carried by 2 of the Lord's own servants. Not kitchen people, servants from the hall, because it's that kind of thing. Everyone looks at it. They admire it. The Lord makes a speech or something. Then someone eats a piece. Then the third course comes. You think about Agnes making a ship out of sugar for 2 days. Does anyone tell her what they thought of it? Edmund looks at you as if this is the strangest question he has heard today. No, he says. She doesn't need to know what they think. She made it right. They'll admire it. That's the same thing. You eat your bread. The yard is cold. Inside, the kitchen hums and crackles. 20 minutes. You go back in. The afternoon is the hardest part. This is not immediately obvious. The morning felt like it was building towards something, and the afternoon is that something. But the thing about momentum is that it's both easier and harder. Easier because the rhythm is established, everything is moving, there's no time to think about being tired. Harder because everything is now happening at once, and the margin for error has collapsed to nothing, and the heat has been building for 6 hours, and your legs are starting to feel it. The first course goes to the hall at 3 hours past noon. The sequence of it is complicated. You don't see most of it happen. What you see is the kitchen side, the pottage being ladled into wide earthenware vessels, the broth, which has been reduced and seasoned and strained twice, going into silver-gilt ewers that live in the cupboard in the corridor and come out only for occasions like this. The roasted meats coming off the spits and being carved quickly and precisely by Gilbert and by a man called Robert, who is the second cook and who carves with a speed that is almost alarming to watch. Gilbert tastes everything before it leaves the kitchen, every dish, a spoon, a bite, a pause, an assessment. Sometimes he adjusts, adds a pinch, stirs once, moves on. He does this without commentary. If something is wrong, he says so quietly and someone fixes it. If something is right, he moves to the next thing. Nothing is praised. Praise is not the currency of this kitchen. Correct is the currency. correct means you've done your job. Better than correct means you're ready to do a harder job. The dishes go through the door in the screens passage, carried by servers who are not kitchen people but hall people, dressed well enough for the hall, and they disappear into the corridor and you don't see them again for a while. And then the empty dishes come back and they are washed and the kitchen keeps going. The screens passage. You've been through it briefly twice. It connects the kitchen corridor to the hall. It's a narrow covered space, and if you stand in the right spot in it, there's a gap in the wooden screen where you can see the hall. Not much of it. A sliver. A corner of the high table, a section of the nearest long table, a vertical slice of the feast. The first time you went through the screens passage you looked, you couldn't help it. What you saw was colour and light. That's the first thing. The hall is lit. At this hour it's getting dark outside, the November afternoon going grey, and in the hall there are candles everywhere. On the tables, in iron holders on the walls, in the iron chandelier above the high table, which you've been told has 40 candles on it. The effect is warm and wavering and nothing like the harsh working light of the kitchen. Everything in the hall looks softer, richer. The second thing you saw was the people. The guests are in their feast clothes. The Lord's household, his family, the visiting nobles, the London merchants who've come for some business with the Lord that you don't know about and aren't meant to know about. The bishop is there, in the centre of the high table, dressed in his ecclesiastical best. Robes that are the kind of red you've only seen in pictures, a gold chain, a face that is, from this distance and in this light, completely unreadable. The people below the salt are different, still dressed well, still eating the same food mostly, but not the same linen, not the same light, not quite the same world. There's a line. You can see it if you know to look for it. Something in the way people hold themselves. Something in the distance between bodies. The people above the salt have slightly more space around them than the people below, and that slight increase in space is, in its quiet way, the whole of the social order of medieval England. You were in the screens passage to carry back empty vessels. You were not supposed to stop and look, but you stopped and looked for maybe 10 seconds, long enough to fix it. Then Edmund hissed your name from behind you and you moved. Now you're in the kitchen and the second course is being assembled, and the peacock is about to leave the kitchen, and you have been carrying dishes and washing dishes and stoking fires and carrying water for 8 hours, and your back is a single long ache from shoulder to hip, and your hands have stopped bleeding and started to simply be dry and cracked and functional, like tools rather than hands, and you're so hungry that the smell of the food is almost painful. You have not eaten since the yard at noon, and the bread and ale in the yard is a memory so distant it seems like something from a different day. The hunger is strange. It's not the sharp hunger of missing a meal. It's a dull, present, operational hunger that you work around rather than through, the way you work around the heat. Your body has decided that hunger is the background condition and has adjusted its expectations accordingly. You stop reaching for food mentally. You stop thinking about eating. You just keep moving. Edmund passes you and says quietly without looking at you, "After the third course goes, we eat." It's not an offer. It's not sympathy. It's just information. Operational information delivered between one task and the next, the same way John the Spit says, pine, not oak, when he needs different wood. But it helps. You know this now. There is an after. The feast ends. The kitchen eats. There is an after. The peacock leaves at the start of the second course. Gilbert carries it himself. This is significant. The peacock is the showpiece of the second course, and the showpiece leaves the kitchen in the head cook's hands, because if it arrives damaged or wrong, the person responsible is the head cook, and the head cook knows it and doesn't delegate the risk. You watch him carry it through the door, holding the silver board level, moving with the deliberate, careful pace of someone who has absolutely no room for error in the next 30 steps. He disappears into the corridor. The kitchen continues without him. The venison is in its sauce. The sauce is dark and thick and made with wine and spices, and it smells like something you would pay money to eat if you had money, which you don't. You are currently earning approximately nothing, or technically you are earning your keep, which is the bed in the straw, and the food on the days when there is food, and the training in the kitchen, which is technically considered valuable enough that your father agreed to it without payment. In 3 years, if you're good and if Gilbert recommends you, you might be paid a small wage. In 10 years, if you're very good and if the planets align, you might be a junior cook somewhere. In 30 years, if you're exceptional and alive, you might be a head cook in a house like this. These are the numbers. You've heard them from Edmund, who heard them from the person who was Edmund's Edmund when Edmund arrived. 30 years is not a number you can feel. It's too large. You can feel tonight. You can feel the ache in your back and the burn on your forearms and the hunger. Gilbert comes back. He sets down the empty silver board and picks up the carving knife and resumes. "They like the peacock," he says. He says it to no one. He says it to the kitchen, and the kitchen receives this information with the collective exhale of an organism that has been holding its breath. The peacock worked. The second course is in the hall. The night is going right. Around you, people relax by precisely the amount it's safe to relax, which is not much but is perceptible. A shoulder drops slightly. A jaw unclenches. Someone makes a small sound that might be a laugh. Now the pastry comes. Agnes emerges from her corner with the pastry cases for the third course, and they are exactly right. They're crimped so perfectly the crimping looks like a pattern in cloth. They are baked to a colour that is the exact gold brown that pastry is supposed to be, which is a colour that only exists for a very short time during baking and then becomes something else. And the fact that Agnes has been managing 4 of these simultaneously, and they're all exactly the colour, suggests something about her that goes beyond skill into a kind of quiet perfection that makes you slightly uncomfortable to look at directly. She carries them to the staging shelf without a word. You're watching her from across the kitchen. Edmund appears at your elbow. Don't stare at Agnes. I'm not staring. You're staring. He passes you a cloth. The serving platters from the second course are coming back. Go. You go. The third course is the sweet course. The dessert, as you don't call it, because the word dessert isn't being used yet in England in 1387. But it's the course of sweet things, the wafers and the confections and the hippocras and the gilded almond paste that took 2 people 3 hours this afternoon to make. Pressing it into moulds and painting it with egg wash mixed with actual gold leaf, actual gold, actual precious metal painted onto food, because this is how you tell your guests that you can afford to feed them gold. And the subtlety, Agnes's ship. You see it leave the kitchen in the hands of 2 of the hall servants, and you see it clearly this time because you're in the right place at the right time, carrying something in the other direction, and they pass you in the corridor and you look at what they're carrying. It's a ship, about 18 inches long, made entirely of sugar and almond paste. It has 3 masts, and the masts have actual linen sails on them. Tiny ones, no bigger than your palm, and the hull is painted with egg white mixed with something blue, and there are little figures on the deck, tiny figures in white that might be sailors or might be angels, and on the largest sail someone has painted, in gold, a cross for the bishop. It took Agnes 2 days to make something that will take the hall about 5 minutes to look at and perhaps an hour to slowly eat. She's not watching it leave. She's already cleaning her table. You watch the servants carry it through the screen's passage, and you think about Agnes, and you think about Gilbert, and you think about all of it, all of the people back here making all of this. And you think about the peacock looking back at you from the larder shelf this morning with its glass eyes, and you think about the salt cellar dividing the world into 2 kinds of people, and you think about the lord at the high table who will eat the gold-painted almond paste and probably not think about who painted it. The kitchen begins to wind down. This is its own strange process. The hearths don't stop. The fire doesn't stop. But the urgency changes key. The peak is past. The 3rd course is in the hall. The dishes still need to come back, still need to be washed, but the precise, terrible precision of the preparation is over, and the kitchen begins to breathe differently. John the Spit is at the door of the spit room, wiping his face with a cloth that is already grey with soot. He looks like a man who has survived something. "We all right?" you ask him, because he's the nearest adult and it seems like the thing to say. He looks at you, the red face, the weathered eyes. He's been turning spits next to open fires for 30 years, which means he has been surviving feast days for 30 years, which means he has perspective you don't have yet. "We're always all right," he says. "As long as the fire burns, we're all right." A pause. He looks at the cloth in his hand, and it always burns. This is philosophy from John the Spit. You take it as such. What happens next is the meal, not immediately. The 3rd course is still in the hall, and the kitchen workers begin the secondary tasks while they wait. Washing, tidying, banking the fires to a lower heat, covering the remaining food, making sure the perishables are back in the cold larder. Your back is still aching and your hands are dry and cracked and you're still hungry. And now you're also tired in the specific way of someone who has been on their feet for 12 hours in extreme heat. A tired that lives in your calves and in the arches of your feet and in the place behind your eyes. But there is an after, Edmund told you. There is an after. The dishes come back from the hall in batches. They come back scraped mostly, or picked over, because people at the high table in 1387 generally eat everything in front of them or send it away partially eaten but not scraped, because scraping your own plate is not something a lord does. But below the salt they eat more thoroughly, and the dishes that come back from the lower tables are often nearly empty, the sauce wiped with bread, the pastry shells eaten to their edges. Agnes's subtlety comes back in pieces, the ship's hull half demolished, one of the masts intact, the sail missing, a scattering of the small white figures, some of them bitten. Agnes looks at the remains, her expression doesn't change. She sweeps the fragments into a wooden bowl and carries them to the corner near the small hearth. Later, the kitchen workers will eat them. Sweet almond paste and sugar is not nothing for people who've been working since before dawn without eating. You eat standing up. This is how the kitchen workers eat on feast night. Standing near the hearth, the remaining pottage from the 1st course poured into wooden bowls, the leftover bread, the scraps that aren't sent as alms to the poor who wait in the castle yard. You get a bowl of pottage and a heel of bread and a piece of salt pork that's been in the pot with the pottage all day, and has the consistency of something that has been in a pot all day but tastes, in your current state, extraordinary. The pottage is deep gold and thick with leeks and has that pepper smell, You put the first spoonful in your mouth and your whole body seems to exhale. You eat standing up, leaning against the kitchen wall, and around you people are doing the same, and no one is talking much, and the hearth makes its crackling sound, and outside the kitchen it's full dark, November dark, the kind of dark that presses against the small windows and makes the inside seem even warmer by contrast. Edmund is next to you, eating with the focused efficiency of someone who has done this many times before. Did it go well, you ask? He considers. Nothing burned, nothing fell. The peacock arrived correct. The subtlety arrived correct. The bishop will say it went well. He scrapes the last of his pottage. Which means Gilbert will sleep tonight. Does he not sleep when it goes wrong? Edmund looks at you with the expression of someone considering how much of the truth to give a person who is new. There was a feast last winter, he says. Big one. Bigger than this. 20 more guests, visiting Lord from Yorkshire, the full works. Third course. The pastry on the venison pies hadn't set. They came to the table half collapsed. He pauses. Gilbert slept in the kitchen for a week afterward. On the floor, near the hearth. Not as punishment. He just didn't go upstairs. You think about that. What happened to the pastry? Edmund shrugs. Agnes's predecessor. He's not here anymore. You look across the kitchen at Agnes, who is methodically washing her table with the same focus she brings to everything. You make a note. The kind of note you don't write down. The kind that goes somewhere internal. Gilbert comes back from wherever he's been, which is probably the screen's passage, checking that everything arrived correctly, checking that the responses from the hall are what they should be. He comes back and he looks at the kitchen and he goes to the hearth and he pours a bowl of pottage for himself. First time he's eaten since this morning, and he stands at the hearth and he eats it. He doesn't say anything for a while. Then he says, to the room, "Good work." That's it. That's the entirety of the feedback. 2 words. But in this kitchen, where the currency is correct and not right, 2 words is significant. You finish your pottage. You eat the bread and the salt pork. You drink another cup of ale. This one's slightly better than the noon ale. A little less thin, either because it's from a different barrel or because everything tastes better after 12 hours of work. Outside, the feast continues. The alms will be distributed. What's left over from the kitchen, the trenchers soaked with sauce and gravy that were used as plates by the guests and scraped from the tables at the end, these go to the poor at the gate. This is the tradition. The feast feeds beyond the hall. The beggars at the castle gate know the feast days and come for the trenchers and the leftover bread and the scraps that filter down through the hierarchy until they reach the ground. You are above the ground, technically. You are kitchen staff. You ate the first course pottage. The beggars at the gate will get the trenchers. There is a strict order to this generosity, as there is a strict order to everything. Who eats what? When? In what vessel? In what position in relation to the salt cellar? But it's not nothing. The trenchers feed people. The scrapings from 200 pieces of bread soaked with the sauce from venison and the gravy from roasted meats, given to someone who's not eaten today, is not nothing. Gilbert knows this. He oversees the alms preparation with the same care he gives to the feast dishes. Same precision, same quality control. The alms don't go out with contaminated food or spoiled scraps. They go out with what's left of the real food. This is not generosity in the modern sense. It's structural. It's built into the feast. But it happens. You think about the people at the gate. You think about Brickenden. There are people from villages like yours waiting out there in the dark. You've been inside all day. You've been in the heat and the smoke and the organised chaos of the kitchen. You've been 3 rooms from the feast and yet completely outside it. Here is what the feast looked like from the inside of the kitchen. The peacock redressed in its feathers and looking back at you with glass eyes. Agnes's ship broken into fragments. 6 hours of heat that makes your face feel like it's been held near a fire because it has been. The cauldron that gave you bleeding knuckles before dawn. The wet wood in the spit room that could have ruined everything and didn't quite. Gilbert's lock on the spice chest. The exact colour of Agnes's pastry. The gold brown that only exists for a moment and which she hit exactly. Edmund telling you there is an after. The taste of pottage after 12 hours of making it without eating it. That's what the feast looked like. And now the kitchen is quieting. The fires are banked. The serious washing up happens tomorrow morning when the dishes come back from the hall's overnight storage. Tonight is just the immediate clean-up, the tidying, the making of tomorrow's first preparations. You help without being asked. This is something you've learned in 3 months. In the kitchen, the things that need to be done are visible if you know how to look, and you look now, and you see what needs doing, and you do it. A pot of water heating for washing. Wooden bowls collected. The central work table wiped down. The herb bunches that got used during the day replaced with fresh ones from the bundle hanging near the small window. John the Spit passes you on his way out. "Boy," he says. You look at him. "You didn't drop anything today, that's good." He goes out. Edmund sees your expression. "High praise," Edmund says. From John. That's genuinely high praise. You sleep in the kitchen tonight, as you often do on feast days. There's no time and no energy to go to the separate sleeping area. A pile of straw in the corner near the now gentle warmth of the banked hearth. Your cloak over you. Your pack under your head. Edmund 2 feet away, asleep within 30 seconds of lying down, with the total convincing unconsciousness of the genuinely exhausted. You don't sleep immediately. You lie in the warm, dim kitchen and you look at the ceiling, which is black with years of smoke, and you listen to the sounds of the castle settling around you. Somewhere in the hall, the feast is still going. You can hear the distant, indistinct sound of many people, the way it sounds from a distance, a murmur, occasionally a burst of something louder, laughter maybe, music starting and stopping. The great hall feasting, you made some of what they're eating. Your hands touched the food. You carried the vessels. You watched the peacock leave the kitchen on a silver board, and you watched Agnes's ship leave in pieces. You were here for all of it. You're part of it in the way that the stone walls are part of it. Necessary and invisible. You think about the salt cellar. Above the salt, below the salt. 2 kinds of people. And below the kitchen, which is already below the salt, there are the beggars at the gate eating the trenches in the dark. And below them there are the people who don't even make it to the gate. The people in the roads and the fields and the villages who don't eat tonight because there's nothing to eat. And at the top of all of it, the lord at the high table with the gold-painted almond paste and the peacock in its feathers, and the bishop in red robes and the 40 candles above the high table, and the white linen and the hierarchy of the salt cellar, organizing everyone in relation to his proximity to power. You made the food, you'll eat the leftovers. That's the relationship. This is not a new thing. This has been the relationship for a very long time. It'll be the relationship for a long time after 1387. Centuries. Different names, different food, different halls, but the same fundamental arrangement of who makes and who eats and what gets left. You are 14, and you are from Brickenden, and you have been awake since before dawn, and you have worked harder than you have worked before in your life. And tomorrow it starts again. Not a feast, just the ordinary work of a castle kitchen. Ordinary work which is still 12 hours and still hot and still physical, and still requires your back and your hands and your burned arms, but doesn't have the particular intensity of today, the way everything built toward the same point at the same time. The distant sound of the feast is getting quieter. People are leaving the hall, the feast is ending, the Lord's house returning to night. John the Spit's words come back to you. As long as the fire burns, we're all right. The hearth glows, low and steady, not the fierce, open-mouthed roar of the peak hours, just warmth, just the constant, patient burning of banked coals that keeps the kitchen temperature from falling to stone cold in the night. Your back stops hurting when you lie still. Your hands on your chest, rough textured, cracked and scarred. Hands that are beginning to learn what they're for, what they can do. The weight of a cauldron, the temperature of pastry dough, the difference between the smell of a spice that's fresh and a spice that's been open too long. 3 months. In 3 months, you have learned more than you learned in 14 years in Brickenden. And what you learned in Brickenden was not nothing, but it was not this. This is something different. This is the world enlarged, the world complicated, the world made into a thing with layers that go deeper the more you look. The pottage you ate this evening was made with pepper worth more than your family's cow. It was seasoned with saffron from somewhere in the Mediterranean that a merchant in London bought from a merchant who bought it from a merchant who got it from a trader who came from the place where it grows, passed through a dozen hands and a dozen countries to end up in a locked chest around Gilbert's neck, and then in a pot of soup that you ate standing up from a wooden bowl. That chain of hands is the world. It stretches from here to somewhere you can't imagine, and you're at the end of it, here in the kitchen, here in the dark. But you're here, you're part of it. The ceiling is black, the fire is low, Edmund is asleep. Somewhere above you the feast is ending, the guests going to their beds, the hall emptying, the dogs moving in to find the scraps between the tables, the rushes trampled flat with 112 people's feet. Tomorrow Agnes will start something new, whatever the next important day requires. Tomorrow Gilbert will unlock the spice chest and smell each pouch and decide what needs replenishing and write it on his small piece of wood in his careful letters that you can't read yet. Tomorrow John the Spit will check the wood. Tomorrow you'll carry things and wash things and fetch things and learn things and make mistakes that you'll fix quickly before they become problems, and the kitchen will go on and you'll be in it, and gradually you'll become part of it in a way you're not quite yet, and then one day you will be completely part of it, and that day will feel like nothing special from the inside, just another day, but it will be something. The fire glows. You close your eyes. Let me go back to the morning, because there's more to it than I've told you. There are things I skipped over because I was following the thread of the feast, and the feast is the obvious story. But the morning is where the real stuff lives. The morning is where you understand what this life actually is. You were woken at 4 hours before dawn, not by a person, by the sound of the kitchen door opening, which makes a specific sound, the latch lifting, the iron hinge that needs oil and has needed oil for as long as anyone can remember, and by the blast of cold air that comes through the door when it opens, cold that finds its way under the cloak you were sleeping under and runs across the back of your neck. You were asleep in roughly the same spot you're in now. The straw, the cloak, the ceiling. You lay there for 3 seconds, maybe 5, the half-awake time when you don't know where you are, and then the smell hit you. The smell of the kitchen before anyone's been in it, which is nothing like the smell of the kitchen at noon, or at the peak of the feast, or even at the end of the day. The kitchen before the fires are stoked is cold and still, and it smells of cold stone and old ash and the ghost of yesterday's cooking. Smoke absorbed into the wooden table and the ceiling beams and the walls, and underneath that the faint animal smell of the raw ingredients stored nearby, and underneath that something almost mineral, the castle itself, old stone and old work. Then the fire was lit. Wat, the youngest spit boy, gets this job on feast day, lighting the main kitchen hearth before anyone else is moving, using coals banked from the night before in the spit room, carrying them through carefully in a covered iron box. He did it without waking you. But the sound of the fire catching woke you, the small crackle becoming larger, the hiss as a wet piece of wood met the flame, the rush as the chimney drew. You opened your eyes in the dark. And then Gilbert's voice from the doorway, not loud, not harsh, just present. "Thomas, up." And you were up. This is the rhythm of feast day, and you're going to feel it in your legs for 2 days afterward, but you don't know that yet. Right now it's just up. Cold flagstones under bare feet. Finding your shoes in the dark. The fire giving just enough light to find them by. The first hour before dawn on feast day is when the kitchen is most itself. This is what I mean. During the day, the kitchen is loud and crowded and purposeful, and the purposefulness crowds out everything else, and you can't feel the space as a space because it's so full of activity. But at 4 a.m, with the fire just starting and Wat poking the coals and you finding your shoes, and Gilbert already at the table reading from his mental list, you can feel what the kitchen is. It's enormous. For the work it does, it has to be. The ceiling is high to draw the smoke. The hearths are deep. The walls are stone thick enough to keep the heat from spreading to the rest of the castle even when all 4 fires are going. The central work table is old oak, 12 feet long, scarred and stained the colour of walnut. The shelves along the east wall hold 100 vessels in different sizes, earthenware and wooden and copper, each in its place, each with its function, and it's connected to everything, to the spice chest and the larder and the well and the spit room and the bakehouse and the hall, through the screen's passage. The kitchen is the centre of a web. Everything comes through it or past it or because of it. You stood in the early dark and you felt that briefly. The size and the weight of the place, the accumulated heat of the past and the incoming work of the day. Then Gilbert said, "Cauldrons in the yard, needs cleaning, start there." And you went. The yard in the early dark, the cold so sharp it hurt your nose, the cauldron waiting on the flagstones like a large piece of the night, black and cold. The bucket of sand and the scrubbing cloth, the first scrub and the first brush of the iron rim against your cold, stiff fingers. This is where the day started. This is where all of it started. On your knees on cold flagstones, scrubbing an iron cauldron in the dark before anyone had eaten or spoken much, before the kitchen was warm, before the first pot was on, hours before the feast would be visible from the outside. This is what they don't show you in the pictures of medieval feasts. The illuminated manuscripts with their lords at their long tables, their peacocks and their silver dishes, their beautiful measured formality. They don't show you the cauldron in the yard at 4 a.m. They don't show you the boy with bloody knuckles scrubbing it. They don't show you the wet wood and the wet wood crisis and John the Spit's face as he assessed whether the pig would be done in time. They don't show you the locked spice chest and what it means that it's locked, what it means that Gilbert sleeps with the key, what it means that the spices are worth more than everything else in the room, combined and are guarded like a treasure, because they are a treasure. And the treasure serves the feast, and the feast serves the Lord, and the Lord serves the king, theoretically. And the whole hierarchy rests on the labour of the people who work the hearths and carry the water and scrub the cauldrons. They show you the peacock, not the person who carried it from the larder trying not to tip it while Edmund told him about the burning cotton in the mouth. The illuminations are beautiful. The reality is beautiful too in its way, just a different kind of beautiful. There is something I want to tell you about the hall, and I want to tell it carefully because I only saw it for about 10 seconds through the screen's passage. But 10 seconds is sometimes enough. What I saw was candlelight and colour and people dressed in their best, eating food that took 30 people to prepare. There were children at the lower tables, sons and daughters of the Lord's household, eating their feast with the focused delight of children who know something special is happening. There was a dog under the lower table eating something off the rushes and being periodically kicked at by the man nearest to it. Not hard, just the reflexive kick of someone who doesn't want to look down at a dog but has given up actually preventing the dog from being there. The music started during the second course. I heard it from the kitchen, faintly, through the walls. 2 or 3 instruments, I couldn't tell which. Something with strings, something else. Medieval music doesn't sound like what you might expect, probably. It's higher, thinner, more nasal, less what we'd call melodic now. But in the right room with the right acoustics and the candles burning and the food on the table, in that room, it would have sounded perfect. It would have sounded like exactly what that room was supposed to sound like. And the bishop was there, and whatever he thought of the lamprey poached in wine, I can tell you that the lamprey made it to his end of the table correctly prepared, because Gilbert carried a second pan to the serving area himself to be certain, and because nobody came back from the hall with news of a problem with the lamprey. The bishop ate his lamprey. He ate the peacock. He ate the venison in its sauce and the gilded almond paste and some portion of Agnes's ship in sugar. And what he thought of any of it I don't know, but he will go home eventually to his episcopal palace, and he will tell someone what he ate, and the someone will be impressed, because the food at Harwood is correct, and the feast at Harwood was a success, and Gilbert's kitchen made it that way. That's the end of that sentence. In the morning, 2 days after the feast, something happens. You're in the kitchen doing the ordinary post-feast work, scrubbing pots, again, restacking the stores, helping Robert the second cook with the evening meal planning, which on a non-feast day is a modest operation. 2 courses, maybe 20 people at the household tables. Gilbert calls you over. He's at the spice chest. The chest is open. This is unusual. The chest is not open when it doesn't need to be. He looks at you for a moment. You know why I keep this locked? You know the answer he told you 2 days ago. Worth more than everything else. A message about the Lord. But you don't repeat that back to him, because that's not what he's actually asking. Because if someone takes a pinch of saffron every day, you say, slowly, working it out as you say it, and a pinch of pepper every few days, and over a month they've taken enough to sell, and you'd never notice any individual theft, but you'd notice when the spice was gone and the bill came. Gilbert looks at you. Who told you that? Nobody. I just. He looks at you a moment longer. That's right, he says. He closes the chest. That's exactly right. Now go help Edmund with the charcoal. That's the conversation. But when you're helping Edmund with the charcoal, your mind is still on it. On the unlocked chest for that single moment. On the fact that he opened it to show you. not to take anything from it. On the fact that he asked you the question at all. Edmund notices you're distracted. What? Nothing. You've got that face. What face? The face you make when you're trying to figure something out. He grabs a handle on his side of the charcoal basket. Ready? Lift. You lift. The charcoal is heavy. Your arms, still slightly sore from feast day, protest briefly and then comply. Gilbert showed me the spice chest, you say. Edmund stops walking. Open? For a moment. He asked me why it's kept locked. Edmund is quiet for a count of 4 or 5 steps. He didn't do that when I was 3 months in, Edmund says. He doesn't say it with resentment, more with something like assessment. What does it mean? Edmund shrugs. It means he's watching you. You carry the charcoal, you think about being watched. There is a day, about a week after the feast, when you understand something about the food. It's not a dramatic day. It's actually quite an ordinary one. You're in the kitchen in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon, and you're making pottage with Robert the second cook. Not the feast pottage with the pepper and the saffron. The ordinary household pottage. Leeks and oats and some scraps of pork. And Robert is directing you through the seasonings, not writing anything down, because nobody writes anything down in a working kitchen in 1387. The knowledge is transmitted verbally and through repetition. Smell that, Robert says, holding the spoon up to you. You smell it. What's missing? You think about it. Smells like onion and warm grain and pork fat. It smells like food. It's fine. Nothing, you say. Robert takes the spoon back. He smells it himself. He goes to the small basket of dried herbs and he takes a pinch of something and rubs it between his palms over the pot. Thyme. He smells the pot again. Now smell it. You lean over the pot. The thyme has done something. It's changed the architecture of the smell. The pork fat has retreated slightly and the grain has come forward, and the leeks have become something warmer, and the whole thing now smells like something you would want to eat, rather than something that would feed you. There's nothing wrong with the first one, Robert says. If you're hungry, you eat it. But this one, he puts the spoon back in. This one you remember. He turns away to check the bread. You stand at the pot smelling it. The thyme was free. It grew in the kitchen yard, dried and stored in a basket. The leeks were from the castle's own garden. The oats were from the castle's stores. The pork scraps were what was left from the morning's butchery. This pot of pottage cost the castle nothing beyond what the castle would have spent anyway. And the difference between the first version and the second version is a pinch of thyme and the knowledge of when to add it. That's cooking. That's what cooking is, under all of it. The spices in the locked chest are the extreme version, the expensive version, the version that sends messages about power. But the thing that makes food food, rather than just fuel, is the pinch of time, the knowledge of what's missing, the willingness to smell the pot and then do something about it. You are starting to understand this. There are things about the medieval feast that are not as they appeared, and I want to be honest with you about them, because the whole premise was a feast that was filthier than it looked, and I've been in the kitchen with you all day, and I want to make sure you understand the full picture. The rushes on the floor of the great hall, they were changed that morning. Fresh rushes, lavender, sweet herbs. This is true, but the people who changed them will tell you that what was under them was not gentle. Rushes in a medieval hall are changed irregularly, sometimes weekly on important occasions, sometimes considerably less often. When they're lifted, what comes up with them is old food, old bones, old dirt, old ash, old organic matter at various stages of decomposition. Mice have lived in old rushes. Dogs have slept in them, the accumulated biological material of a household going about its life. The great hall smells wonderful when you're in it for the feast, with new rushes and candles and the food and the fire. It smells like something from a tapestry. And 6 hours before you arrived, underneath what it smells like now, it smelled like something considerably less pleasant. This is not the Lord's fault. This is just the physics of living in a stone building in the 14th century without a drain or a vacuum or a concept of germ theory. You manage the smell. You manage the smell with rushes and herbs and fires and the rotation of people in and out of spaces. You do not eliminate it. You cannot eliminate it. The Lord's dogs have been in the hall all evening. There are 3 of them, large hunting dogs, and they were under the tables during the feast, and they ate what fell and what was given and what they could get away with stealing. They will sleep in the hall tonight. In the morning they will be in the yard, and the hall will be aired and cleaned. The fish, the lamprey that was prepared for the bishop, poached in wine at the bishop's preference. Lampreys are prepared by being cleaned and gutted and poached, and the preparation is correct, and the end product is a delicacy, and we are not suggesting otherwise. But lampreys are, before they are prepared, something that lives in rivers and attaches itself to other fish with a circular tooth-ringed mouth and feeds on them. The lamprey is, in its living state, one of the more primally unsettling things that you can find in an English river. Gilbert is familiar with this. The kitchen is familiar with this. The lamprey arrives at the kitchen as an ingredient. It leaves as a dish. The transformation in between is significant. The peacock. The peacock is beautiful on the silver board. It is honestly magnificent. It is also a bird that has been killed, skinned, roasted, and then dressed back in its own skin, and the glass eyes are there because the real ones are not. And eating it at the table involves the guest cutting through this surface, which they do with equanimity because this is normal, this is expected, this is what a feast peacock is. But from outside that context, it is a thing that requires a certain adjustment of perspective. The spices that cost more than a horse, they cost more than a horse partly because of the distance they travel, and partly because along the distance they sometimes spoil, and partly because the supply chain is controlled by people who charge what the market bears, and the market is people who need to demonstrate their status through the ingredients in their food. The saffron in Gilbert's chest is the right colour, the right smell, the right age. Some of the saffron sold in English markets in 1387 is adulterated with cheaper yellow flowers, mixed in by traders who trust that the buyer won't have the expertise to tell the difference. Gilbert can tell the difference. This is part of his value. Part of what you're learning in this kitchen is how to tell the difference. The alms at the gate, the trenchers soaked with gravy and sauce go to the beggars in the castle yard after the feast. This is true and it happens, and it is genuine provision for people who need it. The feast genuinely feeds beyond the hall, and the trenchers are, at this point, bread that has been sitting under people's food all evening, and has absorbed the drippings and the sauces, and is now a kind of soaked, compressed flavour object. That is, depending on your perspective, either a delicacy or a piece of used tableware. The beggars eat it gratefully. You would eat it gratefully in their position. The fact that it's a leftover does not make it nothing. It feeds people, but it is also the furthest point from the salt cellar, the absolute bottom of the distribution. The feast is a machine for demonstrating hierarchy. It does this efficiently and beautifully. The candles and the peacock and the saffron, And the bishop's red robes and the white linen and the gold-painted almond paste are all part of the same demonstration. Look at what is possible. Look at who can afford this. Look at where you sit in relation to the salt. And 3 rooms away, people with rough hands and burned scars scrub cauldrons by firelight. Both things are true. Both things are the feast. You are asleep. You've been asleep for an hour, maybe 2, in the straw near the banked hearth, and you don't know what time it is because you're asleep, and time doesn't exist for you right now. It will exist again in a few hours when the bells pull you out of it and the morning starts. The kitchen is quiet. The fire in the hearth is low but steady. The walls hold the heat. The black ceiling and the scarred table and the copper pots on their hooks are invisible in the dark, but they're there. They'll be there tomorrow. They'll be there after you leave this kitchen if you leave it, and they'll be there after Gilbert leaves, and after the Lord who threw this feast is in the ground and his sons are at the table. The castle holds the kitchen holds the fire, and the fire holds everything. Your hands are cracked and your back aches and your arms carry the small maps of the first 3 months. You are learning something that takes years to learn and cannot be taught in 1 lesson or 1 book. The knowledge of the kitchen, which is a knowledge of heat and time and flavour and waste and hierarchy and the specific beauty of a thing done correctly. Agnes's ship in sugar, broken on the table. The peacock's glass eyes in the larder. The bishop eating his wine-poached lamprey. The pottage with the thyme, that's the version you'll remember. Not the feast version, the expensive version with the saffron and the carved subtlety. The ordinary Tuesday afternoon version, standing at a pot with Robert, when you leaned over and the thyme had changed the smell of it, and you understood for the first time what the difference between filling something and making something actually was. You'll be here next feast day, and the one after. You'll carry more cauldrons, you'll have more burns, you'll learn the spice chest by heart, eventually, each pouch and what it does, and which ones are adulterated and how you can tell. You'll learn which parts of this work are about the food, and which parts are about the hierarchy that the food is serving. You'll understand both, and you'll work within both, and eventually you won't need to think about either, because they'll just be the shape of the world you work in. Edmund is asleep. The castle is asleep. The dogs in the hall are asleep in the trampled rushes. The Lord is asleep in his chambers. The bishop is in the guest rooms, asleep in the best bed Harwood has to offer, having eaten the lamprey and the peacock and the gilded paste and Agnes's sugar ship. And whatever he thought of it, he has not communicated back through the walls to the kitchen that made it. The fire glows. Your breathing slows. The sounds of the castle at night. Wind at the narrow windows, a horse shifting in the stable yard, the distant sound of a door, the ordinary sounds of a large stone building holding its people in the cold November dark. This is England. This is 1387, and in 30 years the kitchen will still be here. In 100 years, rebuilt after a fire, but still here, still in roughly this place, still connected to the hall through the screen's passage. In 500 years, the castle will be partially ruined, a wall standing, a tower. Visitors will walk through the roofless hall and look at the stones of the floor and the empty windows and try to imagine what it was like. They'll look at the hall, the tapestry hooks still in the walls, the fireplace the Lord sat near. They won't look at the kitchen. The kitchen is the other direction, past the screen's passage, through the collapsed arch. But everything that happened in the hall happened because of what happened in the kitchen. The feast was the kitchen. The candlelight and the peacock and the bishop's red robes were the kitchen. The 40 candles on the chandelier were the work of people whose names nobody will remember. Some things don't change. The work that holds the world up has always been mostly invisible. The people who do it have always been mostly invisible. This is not a complaint. It's an observation. It's an accurate description of a thing that has been true for a very long time and will be true for longer. But tonight, in the kitchen, in the straw, near the fire that John the Spit keeps burning because it always burns, there is a 14-year-old boy with cracked hands and burn scars learning his trade, and the fire glows, and you are warm enough, fed enough, safe enough. You've made it through your first feast day. You've carried everything that needed carrying. You've scrubbed the cauldron and fetched the water and moved through the kitchen without dropping anything, which John the Spit has noted, and that is not nothing. Tomorrow the ordinary work begins again, but the ordinary work of this kitchen, in this castle, in this year, is extraordinary to look at if you know how. It's the chain of hands that runs from the saffron fields of somewhere far away to a locked chest, to a pot of soup, to a bishop's plate. It's Agnes making a ship out of sugar that took 2 days, and was eaten in 20 minutes and is now in fragments in a wooden bowl and was perfect. It's Gilbert tasting everything, every dish, all day. The whole feast, 1 spoon at a time. Let your thoughts quiet now. The fire is low. Edmund breathes steadily next to you. The castle breathes around you. Tomorrow will come soon enough. Tomorrow the cauldrons need carrying back from the hall. Tomorrow the stores need replenishing. Tomorrow the ordinary rhythm of a medieval kitchen continues, with its heat and its weight and its small exact knowledges. But that's tomorrow. Right now there's just this. The warmth of the banked fire, the straw under your back, the ceiling, black with years of smoke above you. The knowledge that sits in your hands now, in the way they're starting to know things. Let that knowledge settle. Let the day's weight go. Let the sounds of the castle and the distant hall and the November wind fade into the background where they belong. You've been awake since before dawn, since the cold flagstones and the dark yard and the cauldron waiting to be scrubbed, since the first blast of heat through the kitchen door and the first crackle of the fire catching. You've been here for all of it. And now rest. The fire will keep burning without you. The kitchen will be here in the morning. The castle will hold. And centuries from now, someone will stand in the roofless hall and try to imagine what it was like to be here, what it sounded like, what it smelled like, what it felt like to live inside this place when it was alive. They'll try to imagine the feast. You don't have to imagine it. You made it. Sleep. Good night. But you don't sleep yet. Not quite. The mind after a feast day doesn't go quiet like the mind after a normal day. A normal day is repetition and routine. And when it ends, the body is tired and the mind has nothing unresolved, and sleep comes straightforwardly. But a feast day is different. A feast day has peaks in it, moments of concentration so intense they leave marks, and when the concentration releases, the mind doesn't go blank, it replays. It goes back. You lie in the straw and you see the peacock again. Not the completed peacock on the silver board, the earlier one. The peacock when you first came into the larder and saw it on the shelf, before you understood what it was. For a half-second it looked alive. The iridescent feathers, the fan of the tail, the angle of the head. For a half-second before your brain caught up, you thought there was a living bird in the castle larder. Then your brain caught up. And the thing that had looked alive was not alive. and hadn't been alive for at least 2 days, and the eyes were glass, and the weight of it when you lifted the board was the weight of something that had been skinned and roasted, and you carried it through the kitchen yard in the cold air and through the kitchen door, and you didn't drop it. That's the whole story. You saw a dead peacock dressed in its own feathers, and you carried it, and you didn't drop it. Edmund says that's a good day. Maybe Edmund is right. There is something about the castle at night that I haven't told you. In the day it's a working organism, full and purposeful. The kitchen and the stables and the hall and the stores and the workshops all operating simultaneously. 150 people in various states of motion. The noise of it is constant during the day. Hammering from the smith's area, voices from the courtyard, the sound of horses, the sound of the kitchen. At night it becomes something else. The walls are thicker than you think when you're standing inside them. Castle walls are not walls the way the walls of a cottage are walls. A cottage wall is plaster and wattle and a few inches of something. Castle walls are stone and mortar and 6 feet of thickness, sometimes more. When you sit against one, you can feel the cold of it through your back, a cold that has no bottom to it, that goes back through the stone to somewhere that hasn't been warm in decades, maybe never. The walls hold history the way they hold cold. The castle at Harwood was built 200 years ago, rebuilt in parts after a fire in the last century, added to by each lord who inherited it. The stones in the north wall are older than the stones in the kitchen wing, and the stones in the kitchen wing are older than the screen's passage, and the screen's passage was added in the time of the current lord's grandfather. Walking through the castle at night, which you do occasionally on the rare feasts when the work runs very late and you're going between buildings, you can feel the different ages of it. The older parts have a particular quality of darkness, not darker, exactly, just denser, more present. You're not superstitious. Or you weren't when you were in Brickenden. In Brickenden there were stories, of course, but Brickenden was the village you grew up in, and the stories had a domestic quality to them, a familiar geography. The haunted mill was the mill you walked past every day, and in daylight it was just a mill. The ghost in the church was the ghost everyone's grandmother's grandmother had apparently seen, and it was very far from being a threat. Harwood Castle is different. It's not that you believe in ghosts exactly. It's that the castle at night generates a feeling that is difficult to attribute only to imagination, a sense of compressed time, of many lives lived in the same stone, of the accumulated weight of 2 centuries of people working and sleeping and dying in these rooms. You mentioned this to Edmund once. He told you to stop being like that and go to sleep. You've stopped being like that mostly, but on quiet nights, when the kitchen is banked and dark and you're the last one awake, you can feel it. The stone and the cold and the years, tonight you feel it. Outside the kitchen window, the November wind. Inside, the fire. The line between those two things, outside and inside, cold and warm, is the castle wall. 6 feet of stone that has been here for 200 years and will be here for more. You're a small thing in a very old building. This is not a bad feeling, actually. It's a grounding feeling, a feeling of proportion. You're 14 and from Brickenden, and you've been awake since before dawn, and you worked hard today, and tomorrow you'll work again. And the castle doesn't care, and the stone doesn't care, and the fire continues regardless. There's something restful in not mattering very much to the building you're sleeping in. Let me tell you about Gilbert, not the Gilbert of Feast Day, who is the commanding figure at the central table, the professional in full command of his domain. That Gilbert you know. That Gilbert is a function, a role, a concentrated force of competence. The other Gilbert. You've seen the other Gilbert twice, both times accidentally, and you don't think he knows you saw him. The first time was a week after you arrived. Early morning, not quite dawn. You were coming in from the yard where you'd gone to use the privy, and you came back through the kitchen to go upstairs to the sleeping area, and the kitchen was supposed to be empty at that hour, but it wasn't. Gilbert was at the central table, not cooking, not preparing anything, just standing there in the dim light from the overnight hearth with a cloth in his hands. He was polishing the edge of the central table, running the cloth back and forth along the old scarred wood, not cleaning it, not scrubbing it, just running his hands over the surface the way you might run your hands over something you were attached to, something you owned and valued. He didn't see you. You went quietly back through the door and then came back louder, and by the time you were in the kitchen, he was at the hearth with his back to you, banking the coals for the morning. The second time was a Sunday evening, the kitchen quiet, and you were coming back for something you'd forgotten, a small knife, and Gilbert was sitting alone at the table with a cup in his hands, not drinking from it, just holding it, looking at the far wall. His face in that moment was the face of a man who had put down the weight he carries all day and was sitting with the absence of it, not unhappy, not troubled, just very tired in the way that goes deeper than the body. He's been doing this for 22 years, 22 years of feast days, 22 years of the spice chest and the locked key and the tasting spoon and the 112 people to feed and the locked precise knowledge of what correct means and what it costs when it isn't. He came from somewhere else too. Edmund told you this. From a household in the north, trained by a head cook who is apparently legendary in certain kitchen circles, now dead. Gilbert came to Harwood when the previous head cook retired, and he's been here since. He has no family you know of. He lives in the castle. He is the kitchen the way the stone is the wall. In 22 years he has never failed a feast. You think about that. 22 years. Hundreds of feasts. Every variable of an enterprise this complex. Every possible point of failure. Wet wood. Spoiled ingredient. An assistant who makes a mistake. A delivery that doesn't come. A fire that goes wrong. A bishop who has an opinion about lampreys. 22 years of managing all of those variables to the same outcome. Correct. You would like to know what that feels like. To be that good at something for that long. You would like to know what he was like at 14. You can't ask. That's not how this works. You learn from Gilbert by watching and by doing what he tells you, and occasionally, very occasionally, by him asking you a question and listening to your answer. The spice chest question is the most personal exchange you've had with him in 3 months, and you have turned it over in your mind like a smooth stone several times since. That's enough. He's your master in the craft sense of the word, and he's teaching you something that takes years to teach, and this is the relationship. And it will be this relationship for a long time, and then one day it will shift, and then eventually you will be somewhere else, doing what he does, and there will be someone watching you polish the table edge in the early morning, and they'll know better than to ask about it. In November, the days are short. This is an obvious statement, but obvious things sometimes need to be said aloud to be felt. In Brickenden, the short days of November and December meant the work changed. Less field work, more indoor work, fire tending, mending, the quiet internal life of winter. In the castle kitchen, the short days mean simply that the work happens in the dark at both ends. You wake in the dark, you work in the kitchen all day, and the kitchen's light is its own, the firelight and the tallow candles, And when you go outside to the yard at noon for a break, the light is the thin, cold grey of a November afternoon that has no intention of becoming warmer. And when the evening meal is done and the kitchen is cleaning down, outside the small high windows there is complete darkness, the early evening black of a short day that has been dark for hours. You have been at Harwood for 3 months, which means you arrived at the very end of August, when the days were long and the kitchen was hot in a different way, the heat of summer pressing in from outside, adding to the fire heat from within, and you spent August sweltering and September adjusting and October getting cold. November is cold. The kitchen is warm, but between the kitchen and the sleeping area there's a short stretch of passage that is not warm, and from the sleeping area to the privy in the yard there's a longer stretch, and you have learned to dress quickly in the mornings. Boots on before your feet fully register the temperature of the stone floor. Cloak around you before the cold can get properly established. The cold is part of the rhythm now. Cold and heat alternating. The shock of going from the kitchen to the yard and back. The way the outside cold makes the kitchen warmth feel like something you've earned. You've started to understand that the feast day kitchen at its peak heat, the heat that shimmer the air near the main hearth and dries your eyes and turns your face red, is not just a hazard. It's also a kind of answer. This much food for this many people requires this much fire. The heat is proportional to the need. You couldn't make 112 people's feast with a cottage hearth. You need the scale and the heat and the roar of it, and the person who manages that scale is Gilbert, and the people who work in it are people who have decided, consciously or by default, that they can handle the heat in exchange for the work. You have decided this, apparently. 3 months in, you're still here. Some boys leave. Edmund told you about the boy who was here before you, a boy from somewhere near London who lasted 6 weeks before telling Gilbert that this was not the life for him and walking back to the city. No consequences. You can leave a kitchen apprenticeship without penalty. You're not indentured. You're here because your father said yes, and you said nothing, and then you came, and you're still here because every morning you wake up and you don't leave. This is not a dramatic decision. There's no moment where you chose. You just keep waking up and not leaving, and the days accumulate, and after enough days it becomes simply, this is where you are. This is what you do. The kitchen and the straw and the fire and the cauldron and the learning. The market day. On the Wednesday after the feast, Gilbert sends you to the market, not alone. With Edmund, who knows the stalls and the stall holders, and what things should cost and what things actually cost, and when a vendor is trying to take advantage of a boy they haven't seen before. But you carry the basket and you carry the purse, a small leather purse with coins, whose weight you're learning to associate with specific amounts, and you pay for things. The market at Harwood is in the village below the castle, a 20-minute walk down the hill through a road that is, in November, mostly mud. The mud is deep enough to grab at your shoes, and it smells of what it is. Churned earth and animal waste and the general biological output of a settlement of several hundred people and their livestock. You pick your way through it. You've done this before. You know to stay near the side where the ground is harder. The market is crowded. When you've been in the kitchen for 3 months, the outside world feels oddly large when you re-enter it. The kitchen is an enclosed space with specific dimensions and specific people and specific smells and a specific temperature range. The market is open sky and mud and noise and the smell of everything at once. Livestock. There are animals everywhere. A pen of sheep near the church wall bleating in the cold. pigs in a roped enclosure, a man walking 3 geese on leads, which you would have found extraordinary a year ago and now find merely practical. Vegetables heaped on boards, root vegetables mostly this time of year, parsnips and turnips and onions and dried beans, plus some late cabbages and a few bundles of winter greens. A woman selling apples from a basket. The apples wrinkled and small, but still good. Edmund steers you toward her. The kitchen apples are nearly gone, he says. She charges fairly. You look at the apples. You ask the price. You pay the price. She wraps them in her apron and transfers them to your basket without comment. This is a financial transaction. It's not complicated, but you're doing it with money that isn't yours, money from Gilbert's purse, and you know that when you return to the kitchen, Gilbert will want to know what you paid for each thing, and will silently assess whether you paid correctly. And paying correctly at the market is a skill that overlaps with the skill of negotiating in the kitchen, but isn't quite the same. Edmund is already at the grain stall talking to the grain man about oats. You listen. Edmund is good at this. Efficient without being unfriendly, getting the information he needs without engaging more than necessary, moving on. Oats, you ask afterward. The barrel in the kitchen stores is nearly done. Gilbert noted it this morning. Edmund is already heading toward the next stall. The herb cellar is over here. He's usually short on dried thyme this late in the year, so ask for rosemary too if he's out. They use it differently, but it works. The herb seller is an old man with stained fingers and a knowledge of his stock that is almost architectural in its precision. He talks about herbs the way Robert talks about seasoning, with a specific vocabulary and a specific set of preferences that are non-negotiable. He is out of time. He has rosemary. He also has dried sage and something you don't recognize in a small cloth packet that he claims is beneficial for broth and which Edmund examines skeptically and rejects. He tries that every winter, Edmund says, walking away. Whatever it is. I tried it once. It tasted like wet bark. You buy the rosemary and the sage. The fish stall is near the north side of the market, where the ground slopes slightly and whatever liquid accumulates drains away from the main area rather than toward it. The fishman sells salt fish primarily, the preserved kind, and fresh river fish when they're available, and in November the fresh fish are sporadic and expensive, and today there are none. Salt cod, salt herring, salt eel. You buy what Gilbert listed. Standing at the fish stall, waiting while the fishman wraps the herring in cloth, you look at the market. All of it. The people moving between the stalls in the cold, their breath coming out in small clouds. The children running through the gaps between vendors. The older men standing in groups near the warm side of the livestock pen. These are the people who live in the village below the castle. The miller and his family, the smiths and the thatchers and the weavers and the farmers. The people whose relationship to the castle is a relationship of service and proximity. They sell to the castle and occasionally buy from it, and they bring their disputes to the Lord's court, and they pay their dues in grain or labour or money depending on their arrangement. The castle feeds 112 people at a feast, and the feast requires supplies from this market, and this market exists partly because the castle is here, and the castle requires the market. Everything is connected to everything. The village and the castle and the kitchen and the spice routes from the Mediterranean, and the bishop's red robes and the beggars at the gate eating the trenchers. All one thing, pulled in different directions by the forces that run through it, by hierarchy and labour and weather and the price of pepper. You are in it. 14 years old with a basket of salt herring and a purse with fewer coins in it than it started with. Ready? Edmund says. Yes. You walk back up the hill through the mud. In the kitchen, Gilbert checks the contents of the basket item by item. He picks up the apples, feels their weight, smells one. Price? He asks, not looking up. You tell him. He puts the apple down, goes to the salt herring. Price? You tell him. He unwraps a piece of the herring and holds it to his nose, rewraps it, goes to the rosemary. Why rosemary? He had no time. Edmund said rosemary would work. A pause. He looks at the rosemary, looks at you. What else did he have? Sage. He tried to sell something else, a dried. I don't know what it was. Edmund said no. Dried fern. You look at him. It's what he always tries to sell in November. It does nothing. Edmund's right. He takes the rosemary and moves it to the shelf. Apples are good. Herring is good. He pauses. You paid correctly for the apples. This is information. It is not praise, but it is a different thing from silence, and you have learned to read the space between Gilbert's silence and his corrections, and in that space, you paid correctly for the apples, is its own kind of thing. You empty the basket. You go back to work. There is a day in December when it snows. The snow starts at night, and by morning it's 2 inches deep in the kitchen yard, and there are tracks in it. The prints of birds and 1 set of boot prints going to the well and back, made by whoever woke earliest and went for water before you did. You stand in the yard in the new snow, bucket in hand, looking at it. The castle looks different in snow. Everything looks different in snow. The stone walls go from grey to a kind of pale brilliance. The yard is still and quiet in the way it only is when snow has muffled the sound. Your breath comes out in large clouds. The well is cold. The rope is stiff with frost. It takes longer than usual. In the kitchen, the fires has been going for an hour already, and the heat is welcome in a specific way. It isn't in summer. The heat as comfort rather than burden. You set the bucket down and warm your hands at the hearth and feel the cold in your fingers slowly replacing itself with warmth, the prickling transition. Snow's come, Edmund says unnecessarily. Yes. November feast went well. Now we get to do the Christmas feast. You look at him. He has the face of someone who has done a Christmas feast before and is under no illusions about it. How many people? You ask. More than last time, Edmund says. Always more at Christmas. Everybody comes home for Christmas. Everybody brings people. He rubs his hands together near the fire. Gilbert starts planning the week after the November feast. He's already planning. You think about Gilbert somewhere in the castle already planning. What's different about Christmas, you ask. Edmund considers. More of everything. More courses. More expensive ingredients. The boar's head, which is its own entire operation that starts days before. More guests, which means more dishes, which means more everything. And colder. Everything you do in a cold kitchen is harder. He stretches his back. And there's a subtlety. There's always a subtlety at Christmas. Agnes starts it the week before and she doesn't sleep much while she's making it. You look at the snow outside the kitchen door. More of everything. Your back protests briefly, from memory. But you have done a feast now. You know what it looks like from the inside. You know the shape of it. You know the peacock and the spice chest and the wet wood and John the Spit's verdict at the end. You know the pottage with the thyme. You know what correct feels like when you've achieved it, and what it feels like when you're close but not quite. Christmas will be harder. More of everything. Colder kitchen, harder work, more people to feed, and you'll do it. That's the fact of it. You'll wake before dawn and go to the cold yard and come back into the heat and start moving, and the feast will build through the day, and the kitchen will reach its peak, and the dishes will go through the screen's passage, and the peacock or the boar's head or whatever it is this time will leave the kitchen correct, and then it will be midnight and you'll eat what's left, standing up near the fire, and then you'll sleep in the straw, and then it will start again. Let me tell you one more thing about the feast before I let you sleep. The trenchers. The bread trenchers used as plates at the feast. Thick slices of bread cut from day-old loaves, dense enough to hold liquid without immediately dissolving, placed in front of each guest to receive their food. At the end of the feast, the trenchers are collected from the tables, soaked with the drippings and sauces of everything eaten on top of them, and they go to the poor at the gate. This is the final movement of the feast, the alms, the redistribution, and here is what happens at the gate. There are always people there. On feast day more than usual, because word travels, because people know what day it is and what comes at the end of it. There are village people, genuinely poor, who depend on these distributions as part of their diet during the winter months. There are travellers, people passing through on roads that lead between places, who have nowhere to sleep and nothing to eat tonight, and who know that castle gates give alms on feast days. There are a few people whose circumstances you can't read, who might be anything, who stand at the edge of the group and take what's given without comment. You don't see this happen. You're in the kitchen, but you've heard it described. The gate opens. The steward's man comes out with 2 of the kitchen workers carrying baskets. The baskets have the trenchers, the leftover bread, the scraps that haven't gone elsewhere in the hierarchy. They distribute it. The people at the gate take it. Some of them have bowls or cloths to wrap things in. Some of them eat immediately, standing in the cold. This takes 15 minutes. Then the gate closes. The people scatter into the winter dark, carrying whatever they received. The feast is over. The castle goes to bed. The fire burns low. The kitchen is dark. And in the straw, a boy with rough hands is learning something that takes years to learn. And his hands are already different from what they were, and they'll be more different in a year, and in 10 years they'll be a craftsman's hands, full of knowledge, and some of what's in them was put there in a castle kitchen in England in the year of our Lord, 1387, on a feast day in November, when the peacock left the kitchen on a silver board and came back correct, and the head cook said 2 words to the room, and everyone exhaled. 2 words. Good work. That's enough. Let it be enough. The fire glows. The snow is falling in the castle yard, quiet and steady in the dark, covering the boot prints and the birds' tracks, making everything new, making the old stones clean and white for one night before the morning comes, and the yard fills with footprints again, and the snow compresses to grey slush. But for now, for this moment, white, quiet, the fire. Your eyes are already closed. The last thought before sleep. Tomorrow you'll have to refill the herb basket. Gilbert noted the rosemary is low and the sage is nearly gone. You'll go to the herb shed in the morning and fill the basket. Your hands will be cold. Your breath will come out in clouds. The kitchen door will be warm when you come back in, and you'll start again, always again. Let the sounds of the castle fade. Let the warmth of the banked fire hold you. Let the darkness take over, quiet and complete. Centuries will pass. The castle will change. The walls will be repaired, rebuilt, added to, and eventually allowed to stand in silence after the household is gone, and the reasons for it are gone. The lord's lineage ended or moved elsewhere, the kitchen cold and roofless, open to the sky. And someone will stand in that roofless kitchen, centuries from now, and look at the walls, the scarred stone, the outline of where the central table stood, and they'll try to imagine what it sounded like in here, what it smelled like, what the heat was like on a feast day when all 4 hearths were going. They'll almost be able to imagine it. But the knowing is in the hands. The knowing is in the cracked skin and the burn scars and the weight of a cauldron carried across a cold yard and the texture of good pastry before it goes in the oven and the smell of a pot of soup that needs something, needs time at the time. There it is. Sleep. Good night. There is one more thing. The night before a feast, Gilbert sleeps badly. You know this because you sleep in the kitchen on feast nights, and the night before the November feast you were already there, already in the straw, and at some point in the small hours before dawn you heard Gilbert come downstairs. Not to the kitchen, just to the corridor between the kitchen and the hall, the covered passage. He sat there for a while. You could hear him, not doing anything, just sitting. Then he came back, and at the first hint of dawn he was at the table, cloth in hand, running it over the old wood. You've been thinking about that ever since, not with concern exactly, more with a feeling that doesn't quite have a name yet, a feeling about what it means to do something for 22 years and still not sleep the night before the biggest version of it. It means you're still trying. It means the thing hasn't gone hollow. Some people do something long enough that it goes hollow, becomes just motion, just performance, no weight in it. Gilbert has done this 22 years and it still has weight. He still sits in the corridor the night before, not able to sleep. He still polishes the table in the early dark before anyone's watching. That's something. That's actually quite a lot. You don't know if you'll still be in a kitchen in 22 years. You might be. You might not. The future is the way the November sky is, solid grey and low and giving nothing away about what's coming. But if you are, if you're still here, if you're Gilbert in 22 years, you'd like to still care. You'd like the thing to still have weight, to still be the kind of person who sits in a corridor the night before, because it matters, because it has always mattered, because you built your life in a place that requires you to care about it correctly. 22 years. You close your eyes. The fire breathes. Here is the last thing about the medieval feast. The last real thing. Before sleep takes you for good, the feast happened. All of it. The peacock and the sugar ship and the bishop's wine-poached lamprey. The 40 candles on the chandelier and the white linen and the great salt cellar in the centre of the high table. The people above it and below it. The music, the tapestries, and also the wet wood and the bleeding knuckles and the hungry afternoon and the cauldron in the yard before dawn. The burned scars and the cracked hands and the pottage eaten standing up in the dark from a wooden bowl. Both things happened in the same building on the same day, 3 rooms apart. The feast is always both. The beauty is made by the people with the rough hands. The rough hands make the beauty. The distance between them is the feast, and the feast is what everyone remembers. And what the rough hands made, they remember differently. They remember it from the inside, and that version isn't worse. It's just true in a way the outside version isn't. You made something today, not the whole feast. You're 14, and you've been here 3 months. You carried things and scrubbed things and you didn't drop the peacock. But that's part of the whole. The carrying and the scrubbing and the not dropping are part of the whole, and without them the feast doesn't happen, and the feast is the thing that people will remember and talk about, and the bishop will mention to whoever he mentions things to when he gets home. And somewhere in what he says about it, in the chain of appreciation that starts with the peacock on the silver board and ends somewhere far away from this kitchen, There is the fact of the cauldron scrubbed in the cold yard before dawn. He won't mention it. Nobody will mention it. But it's there. Now. Breathe. The fire. The snow in the yard still falling. The stone walls 6 feet thick holding everything in. Edmund breathing. The castle. The dark. The warmth enough to sleep. Tomorrow you'll carry water. You'll clean something. You'll move something from one place to another. You'll learn something small that's part of something larger. You'll eat at noon and eat again at the end of the day, and the food will taste good because you'll be hungry. And somewhere in the middle of it, if you're quiet enough and paying enough attention, something will happen. Some small piece of knowledge will settle into your hands, into the cracked skin and the calluses, and it will be yours. And that's the work. That's all the work is. Small things done correctly, every day. Until the small things become second nature, and the second nature becomes mastery, and the mastery becomes the thing you carry for 22 years, the thing you polish in the early dark when no one's watching, the thing you care about even now, even after all of it. Sleep. The fire holds. Good night. The morning after the feast, there is a particular quality of silence. You know this now. You learned it after the last feast, the smaller one in October, but this morning it's stronger because the November feast was bigger. A silence that is the absence of the previous day's noise, the way a room feels emptier after it's been full of people than a room that was never full at all. The kitchen is cold in the way only a banked fire can be cold. Warm at the hearth, genuinely cold 6 feet away, the heat stratified in layers that you can feel when you move through the room. Your feet on the cold flags, your face in the warmer air above. You built the fire up. This is your job first thing, before anyone else is properly awake. You rake the coals, add kindling, blow carefully at the base until the kindling catches, add the first pieces of wood. There is a skill to this. There is a point in the sequence where you add too much too fast and the fire goes out, and a point where you're too cautious and it takes 3 times as long. You've been at the wrong point on both sides. You're closer to the right point now. The fire catches, spreads. The kitchen begins to warm. You sit back on your heels and watch it for a moment. The heat expanding outward from the growing fire. The light changing in the room. This is the beginning of every day. Before the work, before Gilbert's measuring look and Edmund's knowing commentary and John the Spit's weather-worn philosophy, before the first errand and the first carry and the first instruction, just you and the fire you've started and the kitchen waking up around you. This is yours, not the feast, not the peacock, not the spice chest or the subtlety or the bishop's opinion about lampreys. Just this. The fire started correctly, the kitchen warming, the day not yet begun. A small, correct thing, one of many. Your hands smell of ash and wood smoke. They will smell of ash and wood smoke for most of your life, probably. The smell has worked itself into the skin at this point, and the washing only moves it around. It's become part of you the way the calluses are part of you and the burn scars are part of you. Signs of the work, signs of the days. Outside the kitchen window, the snow from last night is still on the ground, but lighter now, thinning, and the sky is the pale grey of a November morning that will be cold all day. In the village below the castle, people are starting their day. Smoke from cottage chimneys, the sound of animals being let out, the sound of a cartwheel on frozen ground. The world waking up, all of it. The village and the castle and the kitchen and somewhere far away the places the spices come from, the saffron fields and the pepper trees and the ginger roots, all of them existing simultaneously in the same morning, all of them connected to each other in ways that move through money and ships and hands and locked chests. You are in it. In the chain, the newest link, the smallest one, the one still forming, but there. The fire crackles. The kitchen fills with warmth. In a few minutes Edmund will come down, and then Gilbert, and the day will begin properly, and there will be work and more work and the ordinary rhythm of a kitchen between feasts. But for now, just the fire, just the warmth you made. Good morning. Well, good night. Both are true. The fire holds either way. Let it hold. Let sleep find you before the morning does. You've earned it. Good night.